Welcome to CozySideAudio, where every story pulls you deeper. If you like the thrill, the mystery, and the chase, like, share, and subscribe. CozySideAudio presents The Falcon Cipher, Chapter 1, The Package. The email had arrived at 3:14 a.m. Elias Crane saw it only because he'd been up late grading final papers in his cramped Cambridge apartment. Subject line: "If you're reading this, I'm already dead." He read the sender twice before it sank in. Dr. Maren Kessler. Colleague, rival, friend. And now, apparently, a corpse. The message contained no explanation, just a short line in her clipped, formal style. "A courier will bring you something. Guard it with your life. The truth is in the stars." Elias had almost convinced himself it was an elaborate prank when the knock came. It was just past sunrise when he opened the door to find a courier in a dark green windbreaker, the logo of an international delivery service stitched over the heart. The man didn't speak, didn't even look him in the eye, just shoved a padded, cloth-wrapped parcel into Elias's hands and hurried down the stairs. The package was heavy, oddly warm to the touch. The fabric smelled faintly of dust and incense. A crimson wax seal, already cracked, bore the impression of a falcon in mid-dive. Ellis locked the door, drew the blinds, and set the parcel on his desk. The air in his apartment suddenly felt close, charged with static. He hesitated only a second before unwrapping it. Inside lay an aged leather volume, its cover pitted and warped by centuries of handling. Faded gilding spelled out a name in Latin: Giovanni di Falco. Elias's pulse quickened. Di Falco was a minor Renaissance astronomer, obscure even to specialists like him. Most of his works had been lost in a fire at a Venetian library in 1572. He ran his fingers over the cover. The leather was softer than he expected, almost pliant. As he turned it over, a scrap of paper fluttered to the floor. He picked it up. Kessler's neat, angular handwriting stared back at him. "You'll need your father's cipher wheel. Begin with the margins." Elias felt the old ache twist in his chest. His father, a codebreaker for the British military, had died when Elias was 17. The man's battered brass cipher wheel had been one of the few things he left behind. He opened the diary. The pages were dense with cramped handwriting in a script Elias had never seen. Part Latin, part Greek, but fractured, rearranged. Sentences bent at strange angles across the page, interrupted by symbols that seemed astronomical in nature. Miniature suns, crescents, constellations rendered with almost obsessive detail. And the margins, God, the margins, were packed with even stranger markings. Tiny ink dots formed swirling shapes, like star clusters drawn from memory. Some were linked with delicate lines, others hovered alone, isolated. Elias's academic instincts told him this wasn't random. As he flipped through the pages, he noticed the diagrams grew more complex, the star patterns shifting subtly, as though telling a story in motion. A shiver crawled down his spine. The book wasn't just about astronomy. It was a puzzle, one built into the very structure of the text. The knock came again, louder this time. Elias froze. He hadn't ordered anything else. Another knock, sharp and insistent. Me. He slipped the diary into his satchel, pushing the flap closed just as the sound of footsteps moved down the hall. Peering through the peephole, he caught a glimpse of two men in dark suits at the far end of the corridor. One spoke into an earpiece. The other glanced toward his door with the flat, cold eyes of someone accustomed to getting inside locked places. Elias's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. A voice, male, low, and urgent. "Professor Crane, you are in danger. Leave your apartment now." The line went dead. 15 minutes later, Elias was striding across Harvard Yard, the satchel heavy against his hip. Students milled around him, oblivious. He tried to focus, but the questions piled faster than he could process them. Why had Kessler sent him the diary? Why was she dead? And why did someone care enough to follow him within hours of its arrival? He knew one thing, the phrase she'd left him, "The truth is in the stars," wasn't poetic metaphor. It was literal. DeFalco had been an astronomer obsessed with mapping the heavens at a time when the church dictated the shape of the cosmos. If this diary contained observations the world had never seen, they might be worth killing for. In the quiet stacks of the Widener Library, Elias found a corner table and pulled out the diary. The old brass cipher wheel, rescued from a drawer of family relics, sat beside him. He began with the margins. The dots and lines, when overlaid on the cipher wheel's compass ring, matched specific letter shifts. Slowly, painstakingly, he pulled words from the void. Domus Astrae, House of the Stars. Another phrase emerged. Florentia Lux Occulta, Florence, Hidden Light. Florence. He was still staring at the decoded words when movement caught his eye. A reflection in the darkened glass of the library window. A man stood between the stacks, watching him. Not a student, not a librarian. The man's lips moved slightly, as though speaking into an unseen microphone. Elias shut the diary, scooped it and the wheel into his satchel, and slipped out the side exit into the cold December air. He moved quickly, weaving through pedestrians until he reached the wrought iron gates at Quincy Street. A black sedan idled there, engine humming. The rear windows slid down just enough for him to see a woman's face, sharp cheekbones, ice-gray eyes. Professor Crane, she said, her voice smooth but urgent. Get in. If you want to live long enough to solve that diary, we don't have much time. Elias glanced back toward the library. The suited man was emerging now, scanning the street. Against every instinct screaming at him, he climbed into the car. The door shut with a heavy, final click. Tina. Chapter 2. First Keys. The black sedan moved like a shadow through the narrow Cambridge streets, its tinted windows turning the winter morning into a muted gray. Elias sat stiffly in the back seat, the satchel clutched to his chest. The woman beside him didn't speak at first. Her hands, gloved in supple black leather, rested calmly in her lap, but her posture radiated alertness. Finally, she glanced at him. Ian. My name is Clara Voss, she said. Art historian. I worked with Dr. Kessler on a project she never told you about. Elias studied her profile. There was no hint of warmth in her expression, just precision. You knew she was dead. Clara's eyes flicked to him. I knew she was in danger. Now we both are. The car turned sharply, heading toward the Charles River. Who were the men following me? Elias asked. Clara's tone remained even. Operatives working for a private research firm. On paper, they're an AI development company. In reality, they've been collecting rare manuscripts, lost treatises, and historical datasets for something they call Project Halcyon. They've been after the DeFalco diary for years. Elias felt the diary's weight in his bag. Why? It's just astronomy. Her gaze sharpened. You haven't read enough. The diary isn't just about the stars. It's encoded in them. Every chart, every note DeFalco made is a cipher. The last code Kessler and I uncovered pointed to a location in Florence. She said the next key would be hidden in the city's cathedral. The sedan slowed at a riverside parking garage. Clara leaned closer. Marin said you were the only one who could finish it. She mentioned a cipher wheel. From your father? Elias's chest tightened. She knew about that. She knew enough to trust you with something people will kill for. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a dark coat, cut the engine. Clara opened the door. We leave for Florence tonight. But first, We make sure no one is tracking us. Within an hour, they were in a quiet safe house above an antiquarian bookshop in Beacon Hill. The shop's musty air smelled of paper and wood polish, the shelves stacked with first editions that seemed to lean toward one another like old friends. Clara set a worn leather map case on the table. Before we go, you need context. She rolled out a large reproduction of a 16th century star chart, its edges browned with age. DeFalco was an astronomer, yes, but also a member of the Order of the Falcon, a small group of Renaissance scholars who believed the heavens were a divine code. They thought certain astronomical alignments revealed not only the future of kingdoms, but the progression of human knowledge itself. Elias bent over the chart. Tiny annotations in Latin marked planetary conjunctions. Prophecy through astronomy, he murmured. Not prophecy, Clara corrected. Pattern recognition. They believed the stars held a repeating mathematical sequence, one that could predict breakthroughs in science and philosophy centuries in advance. Elias reached into his satchel and withdrew the diary. Kessler's note told me to start with the margins. Clara's eyes lit briefly with interest. Show me. He opened the diary to the first coded page, revealing the small constellations of ink dots. Using the cipher wheel, he demonstrated how the positions corresponded to letter shifts. Within minutes, they had pieced together a phrase, Florentia lux occulta. Clara traced the Latin with a fingertip. The hidden light of Florence. That's not a metaphor. It's a reference to Vasari's frescoes in the Duomo's dome. There are rumors of a hidden panel, painted over during restoration, that conceals the coordinates for the next location. Elias frowned. Coordinates hidden in a Renaissance? Cézanne's fresco? You'd be surprised, she said dryly. Artists of the period loved hiding information in plain sight. Geometry was a language, and they spoke it fluently. They worked into the evening, cross-referencing the diary's diagrams with the star chart. Elias noticed something unsettling. The constellations didn't match modern maps exactly. Certain stars were missing, replaced with faint, unfamiliar points of light. These aren't observational errors, Clara said, leaning over his shoulder. They're intentional. DeFalco is mapping a sky we don't see anymore. Elias thought of his father, of the cryptic ways he'd spoken about languages no one realizes are languages. He felt the same creeping sense of standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous. Just after midnight, the driver returned with plane tickets under assumed names. Florence. One way. Elias lay awake in the small safe-house bedroom, the diary on the nightstand. He turned over the final pages, noting that the handwriting grew hurried, jagged. Near the end, a sketch caught his eye, a starburst of lines radiating from a single point. At the center, a symbol he recognized instantly. The falcon in mid-dive, an assus. Beneath it, in Latin, when the falcon finds the hidden light, the 1,000 minds awaken. He closed the diary slowly. The phrase sat in his mind like a weight. The flight to Italy was uneventful in the way only tense travel can be. Every face in the airport a possible tale, every shadow in the cabin a threat. Elias kept the diary on his lap the entire time, his fingers unconsciously tracing the raised lines of the leather cover. When the plane banked over Florence, the city spread below them like a jewel in the winter sunlight. The red-tiled roofs and narrow streets spiraled outward from the massive dome of Santa Maria del Fiore, the cathedral at the city's heart. Clara leaned toward the window. There, she said quietly, our first key. They moved quickly after landing, Clara leading him through the winding streets until the Duomo rose before them, an immense, impossible vision of marble and stone. Its polychrome facade shimmered under the low sun, every inch carved with patterns and figures. Inside, the cathedral's vast interior was cool and shadowed, the frescoes of the Last Judgment swirling across the inner dome. Elias craned his neck, scanning for anything that might match DeFalco's diagrams. Clara nudged him. "Look at the panel near the northern arch. See the angel's robe?" He did, and felt a jolt. The folds of painted fabric contained a cluster of tiny stars, arranged exactly like one of the diary's margin diagrams. They circled the dome, sketching and photographing the patterns. Each cluster seemed to correspond to a point on a star chart, but several were missing. Elias realized the absent clusters matched the strange extra stars in DeFalco's maps. "These are the missing pieces," he murmured. "We're looking at a puzzle built over centuries." Clara gave a small, satisfied nod. "And when we have them all, they'll lead us to the next location." Elias was about to reply when a voice echoed up from the nave below, sharp and guttural, Italian, but urgent. Clara's expression froze. "We need to go. Now." They descended toward the side exit, but Elias couldn't resist one last glance upward. For a fleeting moment, the morning sun broke through the high windows, illuminating the fresco's hidden stars in a way that made them glow like embers. It was as if the heavens themselves were reminding him, "The truth is in the stars." He followed Clara into the cold Florentine air, unaware that three figures were already shadowing them from across the piazza. Tense. Chapter 3. The Florence Cathedral. The piazza outside Santa Maria del Fiore was alive with the late-morning hum of tourists, street vendors, and the echoing chime of the cathedral bells. Elias stayed close to Clara as they threaded through the crowd. Her stride was quick, precise, her eyes scanning shopfront reflections more than the street ahead. "They're here," she murmured. Elias resisted the urge to look over his shoulder. "How many?" "3. 2 men, 1 woman, suits. They're trying to blend in, but they're moving when we move." They cut through a narrow side street, the cobblestones slick from an earlier rain. The air smelled faintly of espresso and wet stone. Clara led him into a tiny cafe with fogged windows. The interior was dim, the air warm with the hiss of the espresso machine. She motioned for him to sit in the back, away from the glass. "While we still have a minute," she said, pulling a small notebook from her coat pocket, "let's lock in what we saw." They began sketching the star clusters from memory, each one hidden in a fold of robe, a cloud, or a swath of painted sky in Vasari's frescoes. Elias matched them to constellations from the diary, noting which points corresponded to the extra stars not found in modern charts. The patterns formed arcs, partial curves that hinted at a larger design. One particular curve intersected with a point marked in the diary's margins, Stella Falconis. "The Falcon Star," Clara translated softly. "It's not on any astronomical record I know of." Elias's mind raced. What if the missing stars are meant to form a separate constellation, one we've forgotten because it was erased from our maps? Clara tapped the notebook. "Then our job is to restore it, and the next piece?" She trailed off, her gaze shifting toward the cafe's door. The woman from the piazza had just entered. No coffee order, no small talk, just a slow sweep of the room. Her gaze settled on the back corner. "Move," Clara whispered. They slipped out the rear door into a service alley, the sudden cold air biting against Elias's face. The alley twisted into another narrow lane, and then another, until they burst into the shadow of the Bargello Museum. Behind them, footsteps quickened. Clara grabbed his arm and pulled him into a tiny leather shop. The owner, an elderly man with sharp eyes, looked up from behind the counter. Clara spoke rapidly in Italian, slipping a folded bill onto the counter. Without a word, he pointed toward a back stairwell. Then, they climbed to the roof, stepping out into the crisp air above Florence's rooftops. The city spread around them in a tangle of red tiles and chimneys, the Duomo's dome towering like a sentinel. From here, Elias could see the cathedral's north face clearly. And there, etched faintly into the marble cornice, was a geometric pattern he recognized instantly, the same curve they'd sketched in the cafe. "You. Clara," he said, pointing. "It's part of the map. It's not just in the fresco. It's built into the cathedral itself." They traced the pattern visually until it intersected with a small, weathered carving of a starburst barely visible from the street. "That," Clara said, "is a coordinate marker. DeFalco must have worked with the masons during the cathedral's last renovations to embed these into the structure." Elias felt a strange thrill. The map wasn't confined to the diary or the paintings. It was woven into the fabric of Florence itself. "Let's get closer," he said. Clara's mouth tightened. "We can't, not with them still following." A shout echoed from the street below, Italian, sharp. Clara glanced over the edge and saw one of the suited men gesturing upward. The woman was speaking into a phone. Clara's decision was instant. "We split. You head toward Piazza della Signoria. I'll lead them the other way." What? No. "Elias, if they get the diary, it's over. Go." She shoved the cipher wheel into his hand and swung herself down a fire escape toward the opposite street. The pursuers shouted and broke into two groups, some following her, one turning toward him. Elias ran. Florence blurred around him. Arches, courtyards, bursts of golden light between narrow streets. His breath came hard, the satchel slamming against his hip. Somewhere behind him, a man's voice called out in English. "Stop." He didn't. The curve of the coordinate marker stayed in his mind as he ducked into the shadow of the Uffizi Gallery. He moved through the colonnade, past statues of Dante and Machiavelli, until he reached the edge of the Arno River. The Ponte Vecchio gleamed ahead, its shopfront spilling warm light onto the water. And only when he was sure no one was directly behind him did Elias slow. He leaned against the stone parapet, the river flowing dark beneath the bridge's arches. From the satchel, he pulled the diary and flipped to the star chart page with the partial curves. He sketched in the curve from the cathedral's cornice, and for the first time, the arcs began to form a circle. At the center, the Falcon star. A cold realization slid through him. The map was leading them not to a single location, but to a sequence of them, each adding to a larger design. And the Falcon star, whatever it was, would be at the center of it all. Clara found him half an hour later, her hair windswept, her breath visible in the cold air. "We lost them, for now." Elias handed her the sketch. She studied it, then looked up with a faint, knowing smile. "You see it now, don't you? It's not just a star, it's a keyhole. And the next part of the key is in Spain." "Spain. Madrid," she said. "The Royal Library. That's where the Order's other manuscripts were taken after the Inquisition. If we're lucky, one of them will have the rest of the constellation." Elias glanced back toward the Duomo, its dome catching the last light of day. The city had given them their first piece, but it had also given him a taste of the danger stalking them. And he had the feeling that in Madrid, the stakes would rise far higher. Chapter 4. The Star Map. The Royal Library of Madrid loomed ahead like a fortress of stone and glass, its grand neoclassical facade washed in the golden light of a winter afternoon. Statues of Spain's great thinkers stood sentinel above the entrance. Cervantes, Alfonso the Wise, Nebrija, each gazing down at visitors as if judging their worth. Elias and Clara approached through a crisp wind that smelled faintly of rain. Behind them, the taxi pulled away into the city traffic. "You're sure they won't be here?" Elias asked. "No," Clara said simply. "But the library's security will make it harder for them to act. We just have to work fast." Inside, the scent of polished wood and paper hung in the air. Rows of high windows admitted pale light that seemed to soften the very sound of footsteps. Clara led the way to the restricted archives, producing a folded letter sealed with the insignia of a Spanish Heritage Foundation. The guard examined it, glanced at their passports, then waved them through. They descended into a quiet, temperature-controlled chamber lined with long tables. At the far end, a librarian in white gloves was waiting beside a padded cradle. "This is the Codex Segovia," she said in lightly accented English. "Acquired by the Crown in 1580, the marginalia has never been fully translated. But thus, the Codex was bound in dark calfskin, its pages thick with the rough texture of handmade paper. Illuminated diagrams filled its margins, celestial spheres, alchemical emblems, and curious geometric overlays." Elias bent closer. The handwriting matched the notes in DeFalco's diary. Small, precise, almost obsessive. His pulse quickened. "Clara," he whispered, "look at the diagram in folio 24. It was a star chart, yet not quite. Certain stars glowed brighter in gold leaf, connected by fine ink lines that formed the unmistakable curve of the falcon's wing." Clara's eyes narrowed. "These are the missing arcs. Together with Florence's curves, we have most of the constellation." Elias traced the lines in the air, mentally overlaying them on the diary's chart. The shape was resolving, a wide circular map with radial lines pointing inward. But something else caught his attention. Faint ink beneath the chart, almost erased. He angled the page toward the light and words emerged. "In Monte Ubii Stella Tangit Saxum." "In the mountain where the star touches stone," Elias translated. Clara straightened. "That's not poetic. That's geographic. DeFalco's order believed certain mountains were aligned with celestial events. In Spain, that would mean the Pyrenees." "The diary mentioned rock carvings matching constellations," Elias said. "Could be what this is pointing to." The librarian returned with a second volume. This one was thinner, its leather cover stamped with a falcon in mid-dive. The pages inside were crowded with symbols, numbers, letters, and strange repeating motifs. One in particular stood out, a pattern of interlocking circles with a small star at the center. Elias recognized it instantly from the diary's final pages. "It's a cipher overlay," he said. "You lay this pattern over a map of the sky, and certain stars align with letters." Clara leaned closer. "Letters that could form a message," Elias said, "or instructions." They worked in hushed urgency, Elias using the cipher wheel to decode the overlay's first alignment. The letters emerged slowly. "Porta Caeli." "The Gate of Heaven," Clara murmured. "That could be the name of the location in the Pyrenees." Elias felt the weight of it. Every step they took seemed to confirm that the constellation wasn't just a celestial map. It was a sequence of waypoints leading to something hidden for centuries. And each waypoint they found made the diary more valuable to the people hunting them. As they packed up, Clara noticed a slip of modern paper tucked between the codex's final pages. It wasn't part of the manuscript. It was crisp, machine-printed. She unfolded it and read silently, her expression tightening. Then she handed it to Elias. It was a short paragraph, written in clinical language. Project Halcyon Language Model Update. Integration of Codex Segovia data complete. Predictions of astronomical alignment patterns exceed 98% accuracy. Awaiting final dataset from Falcon constellation for activation. Elias stared at it. "They've already digitized this manuscript." "And they're using it to train an AI," Clara said. "One that can predict knowledge patterns the way the Order of the Falcon did, with centuries of historical and linguistic data." Elias imagined an AI trained not just on the sum of human history, but on patterns predicting what humanity hadn't yet discovered. It made his stomach knot. They left the library at dusk, the Madrid streets glittering with rain and neon. Clara kept her voice low as they walked. "If Halcyon gets the full constellation," she said, It won't just predict future events. It could steer them, politics, economics, technology, by feeding the right knowledge to the right people at the right time. Or the wrong people, Elias added grimly. At their hotel, Elias spread the diary, the Florence sketches, and the Segovia arcs across the bed. The Falcon's wing was almost complete now, the remaining arcs likely etched somewhere in the Pyrenees. But the gate of heaven, that was the center. Whatever lay there was the keystone of the entire map. He thought again of the diary's strange final prophecy. When the Falcon finds the hidden light, the 1,000 minds awaken. 1,000 minds. The phrase had sounded mystical before. Now, with Halcyon in the picture, it felt chillingly literal. Before dawn, they were on a train north, the city falling away into rolling countryside. Clara slept lightly beside him, her coat draped over her lap. Elias stared out at the dark silhouette of mountains on the horizon. Somewhere up there, the star touched stone. And if they found it before Halcyon's operatives did, they might have a chance to stop whatever awakening the Order had foreseen. The question was whether they'd survive long enough to see it. Chapter 5. The Shadow at Chartres. The wind carried the faint smell of rain as Professor Adrian Cross stepped off the train in Chartres. The Gothic spires of the cathedral pierced the overcast sky, their ornate stonework blackened by centuries of weather, yet still magnificent. Beside him, Mara Ellison kept her coat pulled tight, her eyes scanning the station crowd. "We're being followed," she murmured without looking at him. Adrian didn't glance back. He had learned early that confirming a tale often only encouraged the pursuer. Instead, he focused on the route he had mapped in his head, a winding path through the old streets to the cathedral that would expose anyone trailing them. They took a narrow alley past a patisserie. A reflection in a shop window confirmed Mara's suspicion, a man in a dark coat, pretending to check his phone but matching their pace. By the time they reached the cathedral square, the bells were tolling noon. The sound reverberated through the air like a heartbeat. Chartres Cathedral loomed above them, its facade a tapestry of carved saints, biblical scenes, and strange, almost pagan figures. "This is where Cassini's diary pointed us," Adrian said. "The entry from March 1623. The Falcon watches from the window of God's house." They entered through the great bronze doors. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of incense. Shafts of colored light poured from the stained glass windows, splashing the stone floor with blues, reds, and golds. Adrian's gaze traveled upward to the famous North Rose window. Somewhere in its intricate design, he suspected, was the falcon Cassini had mentioned. He flipped open the diary, turning to the coded page again. The cipher here was different, rows of numbers separated by dashes. He had spent the train ride decoding it into Latin phrases. One read, "Oculus aquilae, the eye of the eagle." Falcon, eagle. Perhaps Cassini used them interchangeably, Mara said. They made their way to the north transept. Adrian tilted his head, tracing the window's pattern. Among the saints and biblical figures was indeed a bird, stylized with a piercing gaze, its talons gripping a tiny star. "That star," Adrian whispered, "matches the constellation diagram from the Florence notebook." Mara was already pulling out her phone to photograph it when the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Adrian turned. Too late. The man in the dark coat was closing in. He grabbed Mara's arm. "This way." They darted toward the spiral staircase leading up to the triforium. The climb was narrow, the steps uneven from centuries of use. Behind them, the footsteps pounded closer. Imd. Reaching the upper gallery, they emerged into a long stone corridor overlooking the nave. A small arched window stood at the far end, open to the wind. Adrian approached it and froze. Through the opening, the falcon carving was visible in perfect alignment with the cathedral's sundial outside. The tip of its beak pointed directly toward a distant hillside. "It's a bearing," he realized, "a direction to the next site." Before they could discuss it, the man's shadow fell across the corridor. He raised a silenced pistol, his eyes cold. "Nah. Give me the diary," he ordered. His accent was faint, Eastern European. Mara stepped forward, voice steady. "You have no idea what you're chasing." "I know exactly," the man said, "and you won't live to find it." From below, a voice rang out. French police shouting for him to drop the weapon. The man hesitated, cursed under his breath, and slipped back down the stairs. Then, Adrian didn't wait to see if the police caught him. He leaned out the window, committing the hillside's location to memory. The next piece of the Falcon Cipher was waiting there. Chapter 6. The Meridian Shadow. The old brass pendulum swung with the patience of centuries. Its slow arc cut the dusty air inside the basilica's nave, each sway perfectly in rhythm with a beam of sunlight creeping across the marble floor. Adrian stood transfixed, the coded diary open in his hands, as if the pendulum itself were marking time for him. "Look at the way the light falls," he whispered. Claire followed his gaze. "The beam is crossing that bronze strip in the floor." She crouched, tracing the inlaid line with her fingertips. It ran dead, straight from the altar to the far entrance. A meridian line. "This was a giant sundial," Adrian murmured. In the 17th century, astronomers used these inside churches to measure the Earth's tilt and track the solar year. He glanced at the diary again, his eyes scanning the latest translation. "At noon, when the falcon's shadow falls upon the king's star, the mountain's eye shall open." The king's star wasn't explained in the diary, but Adrian was certain it referred to Regulus, the brightest star in Leo. The falcon's shadow could only mean one thing: the carved falcon in the basilica's transept, its stone wings spread over the meridian line. They waited. Noon was only minutes away. Tourists shuffled around them, snapping photos, unaware of the tense stillness pressing in on the two of them. As the church bells began to toll, the pendulum's shadow slid directly onto the meridian line. Simultaneously, a sharp shaft of sunlight streamed through the high clerestory window and cut across the nave, landing perfectly on the falcon carving. Its shadow fell in a razor line onto a small brass disc embedded in the marble. Adrian dropped to one knee, brushing away years of dust from the disc. It bore an engraved star chart, tiny and precise, with Regulus at its center. Around the edge were 4 symbols: a compass rose, an alchemical sun, a crescent moon, and an unfamiliar spiral. "It's a directional key," Adrian said. "A map locked in celestial coordinates." Claire frowned. "Coordinates to what?" He ran his fingers over the grooves. "If I'm right, an entrance, but not here, somewhere else. This church is the starting point." Before he could photograph the disc, a voice cut through the air behind them. "You're meddling in matters you don't understand, Professor West." They turned. A tall man in a tailored charcoal suit stood just inside the nave's side door. He looked completely out of place amid the dusty pews, his polished shoes gleaming. In his hand was a slim black folder, and his cold gray eyes fixed on Adrian like a predator sizing up its prey. "You've been following us," Claire said sharply. The man smiled faintly. "Following? No, guiding." He stepped forward, each stride deliberate. "The diary you have was meant for you, Professor, but you're moving too quickly." Adrian's mind raced. "And who exactly are you?" The man ignored the question, glancing instead at the meridian line. "You see the elegance of it now. The men who built this place didn't just worship God, they measured the heavens. And what they found? Well, that's why your friend is dead. Claire stiffened. You killed him? The man didn't answer, only closed the folder and handed it to Adrian. Inside were photographs, grainy satellite images of a mountainous region with one peak marked by a red circle. Beneath it, a single line of text. Meridian shadow, 43 degrees 45. N, 10 degrees 30 E. Adrian's breath caught. He knew those coordinates. The man's eyes bored into him. If you want the rest of the truth, you'll be there by sunrise tomorrow. But come alone. He turned and left without another word, disappearing into the blinding daylight outside. The basilica felt colder suddenly, the pendulum's steady swing now ominous instead of calming. Claire grabbed Adrian's arm. We're not splitting up. No, Adrian agreed, snapping photographs of the brass disc before pulling her toward the exit. But we are going to that mountain. Outside, the bells still echoed across the city, as if counting down the hours they had left. Chapter 7. The Bell and the Star. The road to Chartres was slick from a recent rain, the headlights of Mara and Julian's rented Peugeot cutting through the mist like narrow blades. The cathedral's silhouette emerged slowly. First its spires, impossibly tall, then the intricate facade, weathered by centuries, yet still exuding quiet authority. Julian leaned forward in the passenger seat, his eyes narrowing as they approached. Look at the north spire, he said. That's not the original Gothic stone. It was rebuilt after a fire in 1506. The reconstruction might have preserved something our astronomer left behind. Mara parked near the main square, slinging her satchel over her shoulder. The damp air carried the faint scent of incense, even from outside the cathedral. The massive wooden doors were closed but not locked, an advantage of arriving just before evening vespers. Inside, the cathedral was dim, lit only by scattered candles and the glow of its famous blue-stained glass. A low hum of Gregorian chant echoed faintly from a side chapel. Mara's footsteps felt unnaturally loud against the worn stone floor. She paused under the labyrinth inlaid into the nave. Look at the pattern, she murmured. The circular path spiraled inward like a coiled serpent. Our astronomer loved hidden geometry. This could be a map. Julian crouched, tracing the grooves in the floor. If it is, it doesn't lead to the altar. It leads... He pointed toward the north transept. There. They moved past towering columns into a smaller, colder chamber. A wall plaque explained its history. Chapel of the Star of the Sea. The carving above the altar showed a bell suspended above waves, surrounded by a ring of 8 pointed stars. Mara's mind flashed back to the diary. The astronomer had written of the bell that calls the heavens to listen. This isn't a maritime chapel, she whispered. It's an astronomical reference. Julian nodded. Bell, like a bell curve? Or a bell in resonance? And the stars. Maybe they're asterisms, not symbols. She climbed the altar steps, running her fingers along the cold stone. Her hand caught on a notch, a deliberate gap between two blocks. With a soft push, the stone shifted slightly, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside was a small brass object, a cylindrical tube with etched lines capped on both ends. She turned it over. The etching was delicate, almost worn away, but still legible. A series of constellations arranged out of order, intersected by cryptic numbers. And near the bottom, 3 letters in Renaissance script. MRO. Julian exhaled slowly. That's not random. MRO could mean Mont Royal Observatory. It's supposed to be abandoned, sealed inside a mountain in the Pyrenees. Mara's heart thudded. The observatory was a rumor among historians, an impossible feat of 16th century engineering. If this is pointing there, she said, we're closer to the astronomer's final secret than anyone's been in 500 years. A shadow shifted in the archway behind them. And Julian's head snapped up. A tall figure stood just beyond the candlelight, face obscured, but holding something in one hand, a thin wire glinting faintly. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. Mara reached instinctively for the brass tube, tucking it into her satchel. The figure stepped forward one pace, the faint light catching a fragment of his face, cold eyes fixed on her. And then the cathedral bells began to toll, deafening in the enclosed space. Chapter 8. Meridian of Shadows. The wind cut across the mountainside in sharp, stinging gusts as Alex Navarro stepped out from the narrow funicular tunnel. The air tasted thin here, dry with the faint tang of old stone and resinous pine, and below them, the valley stretched into the mist, dotted with church steeples like pins in an endless map. Sophia followed, clutching her satchel against her side, her other hand tucked deep into the pocket where the coded parchment was hidden from sight. "We're close," Alex murmured. The diary mentioned a meridian of shadows. It has to mean something about the way light passes here. Sophia squinted against the glare. "And the star chart?" He pulled the fragile, centuries-old sheet from its protective folder. It was overlaid with circles, intersecting lines, and faint annotations in an archaic dialect of Italian. But along the bottom margin, a separate strip of vellum had been glued on, almost invisible unless you held it to the light. There, in faded brown ink, were coordinates. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. "They match the observatory we've been chasing," Alex said, but the date next to it, 1543, the year Copernicus's work was published. The cable car station behind them was empty now. The operator had taken a cigarette break down the slope. Their footsteps echoed as they crossed a cracked stone causeway leading to a round tower built directly into the cliff. No sign marked it, but above the arched door was a carved falcon, wings folded, beak pointing east. Alex traced the carving with his fingertips. The falcon again. Whoever built this wanted the symbol to guard the entrance. Sophia pushed the heavy oak door. It gave with a reluctant groan, revealing a spiral staircase. They descended into cool darkness, their flashlight beams dancing over fresco fragments. Paintings of constellations, astrolabes, and celestial globes. A line of Latin text looped above one doorway. Lux in tenebris latet. The light hides in darkness. Sophia translated softly. The chamber beyond was small, circular, and lined with niches holding brass instruments, quadrants, armillary spheres, navigational compasses, all tarnished with age. In the center was a stone pedestal topped with a crystal sphere, hairline cracks spiderwebbing its surface. Sunlight funneled in from a slit high in the wall, striking the sphere and casting a thin beam onto the floor. Alex crouched, the beams pointing at that tile. He brushed away dust to reveal an engraved falcon's talon gripping a cluster of stars. Around the edges, faint etchings formed a kind of cipher wheel. Sach. He slid the parchment from his pocket and laid it beside the tile. The wheel's symbols matched ones in the diary, but here they were reversed, as if mirrored. Alex rotated the outer ring until a certain symbol aligned with the star cluster on the floor. A faint click echoed beneath the stone. The pedestal shuddered, and a portion of the wall swung inward with a whisper of stone on stone, revealing a passageway. Cold air rushed out, smelling of minerals and centuries-old dust. "Hidden observatory?" Sophia breathed. Inside, the tunnel opened into a cavern carved from the mountain itself. It was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. Brass rails curved along the floor, ending in a massive mount that once held a telescope. On the far wall, an enormous mural depicted the night sky as it might have looked 500 years ago. Every star and planet carefully gilded, every line of the constellations inked in deep cobalt. Sen. In the mural's lower right corner, another falcon perched on a branch, but this one had letters inscribed along its wings. It's not just decoration, Alex said. It's a transposition cipher. They worked in silence, decoding each wing segment until a phrase emerged. Sequere auroram ad septentrionem. Follow the dawn to the north, Sophia translated. Alex checked the star chart again. The alignment they were looking for would only happen once this season, 2 days from now. But before he could explain, the scrape of boots echoed from the tunnel behind them. Sophia's eyes widened. We're not alone. They ducked behind the telescope mount just as 2 figures entered. Black coats, earpieces, moving with the precision of trained operatives. One swept a flashlight across the mural, pausing on the Falcon. The other pulled a compact camera from his jacket and took several photos. Alex's pulse hammered. The AI conspiracy had tendrils everywhere. If these men were here, they already knew about the observatory. A floorboard, or what passed for one, creaked beneath Alex's foot. The nearest operative spun, light catching his face, sharp, pale eyes, a narrow scar down his cheek. Recognition flickered in Alex's memory. This was the same man he'd glimpsed in Florence, watching from the cathedral steps. The operative drew something from his coat. Not a gun, but a slim, needle-like device, more surgical than combative. Alex didn't wait to find out its use. He grabbed Sophia's arm and bolted for the far side of the cavern, where another passage disappeared into shadow. Shouts echoed. Footsteps pounded after them. The tunnel narrowed, the stone rougher here, until they emerged onto a ledge overlooking a sheer drop into the valley. Wind whipped their hair. Below, pine forests rolled away into the distance. To the left, an old iron ladder clung to the cliff face. Sophia glanced back. The operatives were closing in. We don't have time. Alex shoved the star chart into her satchel. Go, I'll follow. They clambered onto the ladder, the metal groaning under their weight. Halfway down, Alex risked a look back. One operative was already aiming a small, disc-shaped object in their direction. Huh! A sharp hiss. Then a blinding flash erupted against the rock. The world tilted. Alex's grip slipped, his boot scraping against empty air. For a split second, he dangled above the void before Sophia's hand caught his wrist. Hold on, she gasped. With every ounce of strength, she hauled him down until his feet found the rungs again. They reached the bottom and ran for the tree line, not stopping until the observatory was lost behind the ridge. Only then did they pause, bent double, lungs burning. Alex glanced at the satchel. Inside, the star chart had shifted, revealing another strip of vellum glued to the back. It bore a single word, in blocky Latin script. Aquilae. The eagle, Sophia whispered, or the falcon. And with that, Alex knew. The observatory was only the first key. Somewhere to the north, at dawn, the next part of the Falcon Cipher awaited. Chapter 9. The Orbits of Shadows. The rain over Cordoba had turned to a fine mist by the time Dr. Emilia Vargas stepped onto the cobblestones of Calle de las Campanas, her heels clicking softly in the late-night quiet. It was a street she had walked once before, years ago, when she'd been researching the Moorish influence on early European astronomy. But now it felt alien, weighted by the knowledge that somewhere close by lay another piece of the Falcon Cipher, and that each step forward deepened her involvement in something far larger than she'd imagined. The bell tower of the Mezquita loomed over the narrow lane like a sentinel, its silhouette catching faint light from the sodium lamps below. Luca Rossi walked beside her, keeping his voice low. "You're certain the note from the diary referred to this place?" he asked. Emilia touched the small leather-bound book in her coat pocket. "Not directly. The astronomer wrote about a Campanario de las Sombras. Bell Tower of Shadows. The phrase matches a section of the Mezquita's belfry. But the real key is the star alignment he described. Jupiter crossing the line of Saturn in the spring of 1563. I checked. Cordoba was one of the few locations where it would have been perfectly visible on that date. A car engine hummed in the distance, and both of them paused instinctively. Amelia glanced over her shoulder. Just a taxi rolling slowly past the mouth of the street before disappearing. Still, her heartbeat ticked faster. They reached a narrow iron gate tucked between two stone buildings. A worn plaque read, "Acceso restringido." "It's locked," Luca said. "I know," Amelia replied, producing a key from her satchel. "The archivist at the cathedral owes me a favor." Inside, the courtyard was still, the wet stones glistening under the moon. The air smelled faintly of moss and dust. They moved toward the base of the bell tower, where a spiral staircase disappeared upward into darkness. Halfway up, Amelia stopped. Something about the wall beside her caught her eye, a series of tiny grooves in the mortar, forming what looked like a crude constellation. "Help me with the light," she said. Luca aimed his flashlight and the pattern came into focus. The marks weren't random. They matched the star chart from the previous clue, except one star was missing. "Could it be deliberate?" Luca asked. Amelia traced the groove with her finger. "Yes, the missing star marks where the astronomer wanted us to look, not just what to see." She pushed against the stone where the star should have been. It shifted slightly, revealing a recessed brass disc, no larger than a coin. On the disc was an engraving, a falcon in mid-flight, clutching a sphere in its talons. Around it, a Latin phrase, "In umbra orbitas veritas." Luca translated under his breath, "In the shadow of orbits, truth." The disc was warm to the touch, unnervingly so. When Amelia removed it, she found a rolled piece of parchment inside the hollow. She unwrapped it carefully. Why, it was a diagram, an intricate drawing of a solar system, but not quite ours. The orbits were elliptical in ways that defied Newtonian mechanics, bending toward an unseen gravitational center. The margin held coordinates, but the ink had blurred from age. Before she could examine it further, the sound of footsteps echoed up the staircase. Heavy, deliberate. Luca's eyes hardened. "We're not alone." They climbed faster, emerging into the open belfry where the rain-slicked bells swayed gently in the breeze. The city stretched below them, golden in the street lamp's glow. The first man appeared in the archway, his silhouette framed against the dim stairwell. Amelia recognized the angular jaw and narrow eyes from Seville, the man in the black coat who had watched her at the library. Another figure followed close behind. "You've been busy, Professora," the man said in accented English. "Hand over the disc." Amelia glanced at Luca. His subtle nod told her they were thinking the same thing. She stepped back toward the ledge, the disc hidden in her palm. "If you wanted it," she said evenly, "you should have beaten me to it." The man's lips curled into a cold smile. "Oh, I will." He lunged forward. Luca intercepted him, their scuffle knocking against the massive bronze bell. The clash of metal reverberated like thunder. Amelia used the distraction to slip behind one of the wooden supports, her mind racing. The parchment's coordinates, the strange orbits, the phrase about shadows. It wasn't pointing to a single place. It was pointing to a time, an astronomical event that would only be visible from a certain location. And if she was right, the next piece of the Falcon Cipher would reveal itself in just under a week. She tucked the disc deep into her coat and prepared to run. The bells tolled once, not from the wind, but from the fight raging in the belfry. Somewhere below, a third voice called up the stairwell. "They're heading for the roof." Amelia met Luca's eyes, and they both knew, whatever awaited at those coordinates, they had just crossed the point of no return. Chapter 9. The Orbits of Shadows. The rain over Cordoba had turned to a fine mist by the time Dr. Emilia Vargas stepped onto the cobblestones of Calle de las Campanas, her heels clicking softly in the late-night quiet. It was a street she had walked once before, years ago, when she'd been researching the Moorish influence on early European astronomy. But now it felt alien, weighted by the knowledge that somewhere close by lay another piece of the Falcon Cipher, and that each step forward deepened her involvement in something far larger than she'd imagined. The bell tower of the Mezquita loomed over the narrow lane like a sentinel, its silhouette catching faint light from the sodium lamps below. Luca Rossi walked beside her, keeping his voice low. "You're certain the note from the diary referred to this place?" he asked. Emilia touched the small leather-bound book in her coat pocket. "Not directly. The astronomer wrote about a campanario de las sombras, bell tower of shadows. The phrase matches a section of the Mezquita's belfry. But the real key is the star alignment he described. Jupiter crossing the line of Saturn in the spring of 1563. I checked. Cordoba was one of the few locations where it would have been perfectly visible on that date." A car engine hummed in the distance, and both of them paused instinctively. Emilia glanced over her shoulder. Just a taxi, rolling slowly past the mouth of the street before disappearing. Still, her heartbeat ticked faster. They reached a narrow iron gate tucked between two stone buildings. A worn plaque read, "Acceso restringido." "It's locked," Luca said. "I know," Emilia replied, producing a key from her satchel. "The archivist at the cathedral owes me a favor." Inside, the courtyard was still, the wet stones glistening under the moon. The air smelled faintly of moss and dust. They moved toward the base of the bell tower, where a spiral staircase disappeared upward into darkness. Halfway up, Emilia stopped. Something about the wall beside her caught her eye, a series of tiny grooves in the mortar, forming what looked like a crude constellation. "Help me with the light," she said. Luca aimed his flashlight and the pattern came into focus. The marks weren't random. They matched the star chart from the previous clue, except one star was missing. "Could it be deliberate?" Luca asked. Emilia traced the groove with her finger. "Yes, the missing star marks where the astronomer wanted us to look, not just what to see." She pushed against the stone where the star should have been. It shifted slightly, revealing a recessed brass disc, no larger than a coin. On the disc was an engraving, a falcon in mid-flight, clutching a sphere in its talons. Around it, a Latin phrase, "In umbra orbitas veritas." Luca translated under his breath, "In the shadow of orbits, truth." The disc was warm to the touch, unnervingly so. When Emilia removed it, she found a rolled piece of parchment inside the hollow. She unwrapped it carefully. It was a diagram, an intricate drawing of a solar system, but not quite ours. The orbits were elliptical in ways that defied Newtonian mechanics, bending toward an unseen gravitational center. The margin held coordinates, but the ink had blurred from age. Before she could examine it further, the sound of footsteps echoed up the staircase. Heavy, deliberate. Luca's eyes hardened. "We're not alone." They climbed faster, emerging into the open belfry where the rain-slicked bells swayed gently in the breeze. The city stretched below them, golden in the street lamp's glow. The first man appeared in the archway, his silhouette framed against the dim stairwell. Emilia recognized the angular jaw and narrow eyes from Seville, the man in the black coat who had watched her at the library. Another figure followed close behind. "You've been busy, Professora," the man said in accented English. "Hand over the disc." Emilia glanced at Luca. His subtle nod told her they were thinking the same thing. She stepped back toward the ledge, the disc hidden in her palm. "If you wanted it," she said evenly, "you should have beaten me to it." The man's lips curled into a cold smile. "Oh, I will. He lunged forward. Luca intercepted him, their scuffle knocking against the massive bronze bell. The clash of metal reverberated like thunder. Emilia used the distraction to slip behind one of the wooden supports, her mind racing. The parchment's coordinates, the strange orbits, the phrase about shadows. It wasn't pointing to a single place. It was pointing to a time, an astronomical event that would only be visible from a certain location. Hints. And if she was right, the next piece of the Falcon Cipher would reveal itself in just under a week. She tucked the disc deep into her coat and prepared to run. The bells tolled once, not from the wind, but from the fight raging in the belfry. Somewhere below, a third voice called up the stairwell. "They're heading for the roof." Emilia met Luca's eyes, and they both knew. Whatever awaited at those coordinates, they had just crossed the point of no return. Chapter 10. The Hourglass Vault. The elevator jolted to a halt with a sound that echoed like a final exclamation mark. Dr. Elias Mercer steadied himself against the cold brass railing, his pulse quickening. He and Sofia Navarro had descended what felt like an impossible depth into the earth. Past mechanical groans, occasional flickers of light, and the persistent feeling that they were falling deeper into centuries of secrecy. Unnamed. The door slid open to reveal an arched corridor, lined with marble veined in deep crimson. It led toward a single iron gate, through which Elias could see the warm shimmer of torchlight. The air here was heavy, infused with the mineral tang of stone and something older, like books left closed for half a millennium. "Not exactly your average museum basement," Sophia whispered, adjusting the strap of her satchel. Elias allowed himself a tight smile. "No, this is the part of history the curators never write about." The corridor funneled them forward until the gate loomed before them. In its center was a circular lock. 3 concentric rings etched with symbols neither of them recognized immediately. Elias crouched, brushing his fingers across the grooves. They were worn smooth, not by time alone, but by the repeated turning of hands that had known the combination. "It's a cipher lock," he murmured. "Like the Alberti disc, but with an astronomical twist." Sophia glanced around, impatient. "We don't have time to study it. You said this place is connected to Galileo?" He nodded, pulling from his jacket the parchment fragment they'd taken from the bell tower in Florence. The star chart, drawn in faint ink, showed not the heavens as they were, but as they had appeared on a specific night in 1587. Constellations were distorted, as if viewed through the warped lens of an unpolished telescope. Elias aligned the rings according to the chart, turning the outer disk to match Orion's belt with a strange sigil, then rotating the middle ring until a crescent symbol met the first. The lock gave a low metallic click, and the gate eased open on silent hinges. Beyond lay a circular chamber, its ceiling an intricate mosaic of black and gold depicting a massive hourglass. Sand appeared to spill upward from the lower bulb, defying gravity. Beneath the image stood a pedestal, and on it, a glass case holding what looked like a copper-bound ledger. But it was the walls that stole Elias's breath. They were covered in astronomical diagrams, each with inscriptions in Latin, Greek, and a code he'd seen only once before, in the diary left to him by Professor D'Amico. "This is..." He hesitated, running his hand over one of the panels. This is the Hourglass Vault." Sophia tilted her head. "The what?" A rumored archive," Elias said slowly. "Built by a consortium of astronomers and mathematicians in the late Renaissance. They believed certain celestial alignments unlocked patterns in human events, patterns that could be predicted, even altered. They hid their findings from the church, fearing heresy charges." Her gaze darted toward the copper-bound ledger. "And you think that's..." The crack of footsteps above interrupted her. Elias froze. Whoever had followed them down was close. He strode to the pedestal and unlatched the case. Inside, the ledger was heavier than expected. the copper warm against his skin. Sophia was at his side instantly, helping him slip it into her satchel. The footsteps grew louder. From a darkened alcove to their left, a shadow detached itself. A man in a tailored black coat, his gloved hand holding something small and metallic. The faint blue glow emanating from the device illuminated his angular features. "Dr. Mercer," the man said evenly, his accent vaguely Eastern European. "You've done exactly as predicted." Elias felt a cold rush through him. "And who are you?" The man's lips curled in something between amusement and threat. "Let's say I am the one holding the other half of the hourglass. Now hand me the ledger." Sophia shifted subtly, her hand inside her coat pocket, fingers brushing the small telescopic baton she carried. Elias, however, focused on the device the man held. It was scanning the walls, its glow tracing over the coded inscriptions. "Your AI," Elias said, realization sparking. "You're using it to decode this place." The man inclined his head. "Not just decode, simulate." He took a step forward. "The vault is a model, a map of possible futures, and in the wrong hands." "In your hands," Sophia cut in. "It's not going to be any better." The man's expression hardened, and the glow from his device intensified, sending strange ripples across the mosaic ceiling. The hourglass shimmered, the sand seeming to stir. Elias's stomach tightened. Then, without warning, a low tremor shook the floor. Dust drifted from above. Somewhere behind the walls, gears clicked and groaned, machinery centuries old, reawakening. "Bah!" The man cursed under his breath, turning the device toward the pedestal. "You've triggered the failsafe," he said. Elias met Sophia's gaze. They didn't need to speak. Both knew it was time to run. They bolted for the gate as the chamber's torches flared brighter, the sound of grinding stone chasing them. Behind, the man shouted something in a language Elias didn't recognize, his voice echoing in the narrowing corridor. They reached the elevator just as a section of the ceiling collapsed in the vault, the mosaic of the hourglass fracturing into shards. Elias slammed the button, and the elevator groaned to life, dragging them upward. Only once the gate below vanished from sight did Sophia speak, her voice tight. "That ledger, what's inside it?" Elias glanced at the satchel, then at the dimming light around them. "If I'm right, it's the key to the next alignment, and the last thing our friend down there should ever have." Chapter 11. The Basilica's Echo. The tram screeched into the lower district of Turin just before sunset, its windows fogged by the damp breath of passengers. Emilia stepped off, clutching the worn leather journal like a fragile relic. The last entry they had decoded from Vieri's diary had been a star chart drawn over a map of the city, converging on the Basilica di Superga, a hilltop church that had witnessed centuries of triumphs, disasters, and whispered secrets. Adrian caught up with her on the platform, his scarf whipping in the cold wind. If Vieri's calculations are right, whatever he found is still up there, hidden, waiting. "And guarded," Emilia said quietly. She didn't mean security cameras or priests. She meant the kind of silent guardianship that history itself provides. Layers of tradition and belief that make the truth nearly impossible to pry open without disturbing everything around it. They took a rattling bus up the winding road. From the window, the basilica rose like a vision out of mist, its Baroque dome glowing in the fading light. Inside, the marble floor reflected flickers of candlelight, and the faint smell of incense clung to the air like a memory. Adrian moved toward the high altar, eyes scanning for architectural irregularities. Emilia stayed back, flipping through the diary again. One page caught her attention, not for its words, but for the faint watermark in the parchment. Under the glow of her phone's light, it became clear, an etching of a falcon in flight, Talons clutching a compass rose. The emblem matched the seal on the brass key they had found in Madrid. "The North Transept," Amelia whispered. "Vieri wrote that falcons roost where the sun dies." They slipped past a velvet rope into the dim transept, its frescoes cracked from centuries of wear. A wall panel beneath a saint's statue had a subtle seam, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Adrian pressed against it, and with a dull click, the panel released, swinging inward to reveal a spiraling staircase descending into shadow. And the air grew colder as they descended, the stone steps narrowing until they opened into a crypt-like chamber, lit only by a shaft of light from a thin slit in the wall. At the center stood a bronze globe covered in etched constellations, some recognizable, others alien. Amelia traced her fingers over one unfamiliar star cluster. "This isn't from any modern chart. It's reversed. A mirror of the night sky." A recessed compartment in the base of the globe clicked open when she rotated it. Inside was a cylindrical container, its surface engraved with Vieri's personal sigil. Adrian pulled it free, unscrewing the cap to reveal tightly rolled vellum. Unfurling it revealed a map of the Alps, overlaid with lines of numbers and an inscription in archaic Italian. "The summit hides the eye, and the eye guards the truth." Before they could absorb the meaning, the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell above. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. Adrian's jaw tightened. "They followed us." The two backed toward the far wall, searching for another exit. The intruder's shadow spilled across the steps, tall and angular. Then a voice, calm and almost courteous. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Amelia slid the map back into the container and into her bag. Her heart pounded as she locked eyes with the figure that emerged. A man in a tailored coat, his silver hair immaculately combed, his expression betraying nothing but measured curiosity. He stepped into the thin shaft of light. "Professor Rossi, Dr. Cade, I've been looking forward to this meeting." Chapter 12. The Observatory Shadow. Rain battered the glass of the train as Elias Cross leaned forward, elbows on the fold-out table, studying the faded star chart spread before him. The inked constellations, warped by centuries, seemed almost alive in the flickering carriage light. Next to him, Dr. Mira Vance typed furiously on her tablet, tracing the chart symbols against a 16th century codex. "Every time we think we've reached the end," Elias murmured, "it just folds back on itself." Mira didn't look up. "It's not folding, it's pointing. The diary, this page in particular, is telling us that Brahe's apprentice built something that even the church never knew about." "The hidden observatory," Elias said almost under his breath. The train began to slow as they approached Innsbruck. Beyond the rain-specked windows, the jagged silhouettes of the Austrian Alps loomed, their peaks shrouded in low clouds. Somewhere inside those mountains, the diary claimed, lay the Speculum Astrae, a Renaissance observatory carved entirely into the stone, sealed since the late 1500s. But the closer they came, the more dangerous the game became. A message pinged on Elias's phone. "Incoming transmission intercepted. They know your location." "Who?" he muttered. Mira glanced over. "AI tracking?" He nodded grimly. "It's adapting faster now. Every move we make is cross-referenced with historical texts. It's been fed. It's predicting where we'll go next, before we even decide." The diary's final cipher had brought them here, but now they were racing not only time, but an algorithm that processed centuries of forgotten manuscripts in seconds. Nut. They disembarked into the cold mountain air. The cobbled streets glistened, the old town's Gothic facades towering over them. Somewhere above the rooftops, an ancient cathedral bell tolled, its sound swallowed by the mist. Inside a dim tavern, they met their contact. Lucas Weber, a retired mountaineer with a limp and eyes that had seen too much. He slid a map across the table, yellowed and brittle. "This is from 1612, Lucas said in a low voice. "It shows the route Brahe's apprentice took, but you'll need more than directions. The entrance is hidden behind a false wall in a disused chapel halfway up the ridge." "And the key?" Mira asked. Lucas tapped the star chart. "It's not a key, it's a time." He explained. Once a year, during a specific celestial alignment, a shaft of sunlight would strike a small carving inside the chapel, revealing the mechanism to open the wall. But the diary hinted that the apprentice designed a way to recreate that alignment using a concealed mirror array, meaning it could be triggered at any time if they understood the geometry. Before they could ask more, Elias's phone vibrated again. This time, no text, just a blurred photo. Elias and Mira stepping off the train. "Go," Lucas hissed. "They're close." They left through a back alley, climbing narrow stone stairs toward the cathedral quarter. The rain intensified, turning the streets slick. Elias's mind worked furiously, replaying the diary's phrasing. "The falcon's gaze pierces the stone when the hunter's moon has waned." The falcon, he realized, is a star. Altair. If we align it with Vega and Deneb, we find the mirror's angle, Mira finished. They reached the chapel, a small ivy-choked structure perched on the slope. Inside, dust coated every surface. Stained glass windows, cracked but intact, glowed faintly with the shifting stormlight. Elias found the carving on the wall, a falcon in flight, talons extended. He adjusted the diary's fold-out chart, matching Altair's position to the current date, then set a small brass mirror they'd carried from Vienna. Slowly, the beam of reflected light slid across the wall until, click, stone ground against stone. A narrow passage opened. Cold, stale air rushed out, smelling of minerals and centuries. But before they could step inside, movement in the shadows. A figure in a black coat, holding a gun fitted with a suppressor. "Professor Cross," the man said in accented English. "You've brought us exactly where we needed to be." Mira's voice was steady. "You're with the AI's handlers." He smiled thinly. "No, I am its student." Behind him, more figures emerged, blocking the only exit. The observatory was inches away, but so was the end of the line. Chapter 13. The Observatory Within. The mountain air was thin, biting at Dr. Adrian Vale's lungs as he clambered up the final stone steps. The concealed passage, cut directly into the side of Monte San Silvestro, ended in an arched bronze door, its surface etched with constellations that shimmered under the beam of his headlamp. At the center, a falcon was engraved mid-flight, wings outstretched, clutching a tiny star in its talons. His hands trembled as he pressed the last sequence into the bronze dial, the longitude and latitude they had uncovered from the diary's final page. With a soft metallic sigh, the door swung open. Us. A low groan echoed as cold, stale air rushed past him. Inside lay a chamber vast enough to swallow a cathedral. Lanterns, wrought iron and centuries old, hung from the ceiling, each reflecting a glimmer of light from the snow outside. Why? And there it was. A domed structure sat at the center, not built atop the mountain, but inside it, a forgotten observatory, carved directly into the bedrock. Its roof, made of interlocking bronze plates, was split along a seam, revealing a gap aligned perfectly with the winter sky. Helena stepped in beside him, her breath misting in the air. "Adrian, this is impossible. The mechanisms." She trailed off, her eyes scanning the intricate system of gears, counterweights, and levers that lined the walls. "No," Adrian whispered. "It's genius." On a raised dais sat a table of dark oak, inlaid with lapis lazuli and gold. Resting on it was a single object, a crystal globe filled with pale liquid, within which floated an orrery-like model of the solar system. Each planet shimmered faintly, turning slowly as though by unseen hands. The final diary entry had described the mind of the Falcon, but seeing it in person sent a shiver through him. "It's not just a map," he said. "It's a processor, a mechanical model capable of calculations centuries ahead of its time." Helena's brow furrowed. "This is what the AI is based on, isn't it?" He nodded. The pieces were aligning. The murdered astronomer's encrypted writings, the AI trained on centuries of lost manuscripts. It all pointed here. Someone had digitized the knowledge contained in this observatory's records. The AI wasn't simply an algorithm. It was a continuation of the astronomer's mind, updated with every hidden scrap of history. Yeah. Footsteps echoed behind them. From the shadows emerged Marcus Hale, the man who had orchestrated every move to get them here. His black coat billowed like a storm cloud, and the faint gleam of a pistol caught the lamplight. "You've done exactly what I needed," Hale said. "Open the last door." "Thank you." Adrian felt Helena shift beside him, her fingers brushing against his sleeve. "You're going to use it," she said, voice tight with fury. Hale smirked. "Use it? No. Control it. This AI will predict markets, wars, elections. It's the purest form of foresight humanity has ever had. Imagine possessing centuries of accumulated human intellect and never making a wrong move again." Adrian's mind raced. The diary's final cipher. He had assumed it simply pointed to the location. But what if it also contained a kill switch? He stepped toward the globe. If this was built to see the future, he said, then it was also built to decide who deserves to see it. His hand found the engraved falcon emblem on the base. Pressing hard, he twisted it counterclockwise. Gears shrieked as the bronze dome began to rotate. "What are you doing?" Hale barked, raising the pistol. Adrian didn't answer. He kept twisting until he felt the click. Above them, the dome's opening shifted away from the stars, sealing shut. The orrery's glow dimmed. "No!" Hale lunged forward, a deafening crack echoed through the chamber. Helena had slammed the heel of her hand into a lever, releasing a counterweight that swung like a pendulum. It smashed into Hale, sending him sprawling to the floor. The gun clattered away into the shadows. No. The orrery's glow faded to nothing, and the ancient gears slowed until silence filled the chamber. It's locked," Adrian said, his voice almost mournful. "Whoever wants it will have to solve the ciphers all over again. Maybe centuries from now. Maybe never." Helena's gaze lingered on the darkened globe. "We just buried the future." Adrian looked at her, the weight of their choice pressing heavily on his chest. "Or maybe we just gave it back to history." They left the mountain before dawn, snow crunching underfoot. Somewhere in the shadows behind them, the observatory waited, silent, patient, and timeless, its secrets once again hidden from the world. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay safe.